Welcome to a special series called The Global Crisis Monitor, featured on the Treasury Update podcast. Thank you for joining. On this episode of the Global Recovery Monitor series, host Meredith Zonsius joins Craig Jeffery and Alexa Cook of Strategic Treasurer on the 13th period results from the COVID-19 Impact and Response Survey. This new iteration of the micro-survey reflects how respondents feel about their organization's outlook on health and economic positions during today's global state of recovery. They reveal exclusive data on top concerns around work-from-home challenges, views on revenue levels, organizational outlook on liquidity positions, time estimates for health and financial normalcy, and more. Listen in to this brief discussion to find out how Treasury and finance organizations are being impacted and what to expect next. Craig and Alexa, welcome back to the Global Recovery Monitor series.
Thanks, Meredith. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's good to be here. This longer month cycle led room for quite a bit of changes and progress or regression.
We are now 13 survey periods into the Global Recovery Monitor. Let's start off with the top headlines.
Yeah, I'll begin with a couple. On the health front, it's not been positive. The health outlook extension increased quite a bit. That first period where we say we've turned the corner has extended out significantly. It's the worst it's been since the monitor began. And then from the financial side, I think Alexa will share some highlights or lowlights there too, but we have a deterioration in the industry expectations for the next few quarters are pretty negative financially for respondents there. And then finally, when we look at accounts receivable and fiscal policy from a liquidity perspective, this has turned quite negative on a period over period basis. Organizational liquidity has been very positive for multiple months now, until this last month. This one deteriorated. So about 4.5% more companies were negative than positive on this view. So 17.1% positive, 21.9% negative. The majority are neutral on liquidity, but this was a significant negative turn during this last period.
And then I'll just touch on some of those economic highlights like Craig had said. So the 3-month outlook is almost at equilibrium and has slightly declined since the last period. The 12-month outlook has also deteriorated a bit since last month. And from this measure, a full economic recovery has increased about a full quarter, shifting from 4 months out to about 7.5 months, which makes that full recovery estimate in March of 2021.
This past survey period, we have added in a few survey questions on challenges with working from home and revenue level views. Can you walk us through some of this period's findings?
We've started monitoring that. We cycle questions in and out. We've started monitoring that the last couple of periods. But the work from home challenges, some of them stayed the same and some of them changed. So the never-ending work mindset was number one. That stayed at almost the exact same percentage, about 60%. Last period was 63%. Saw that as one of the top challenges, or one of the key challenges. The second position this time was decrease in team or organization's effective communications. Same percentages, but it moved up to number two. The reason it moved up to number two is tech issues, which was number two prior, moved to number three, and a third of the respondents indicated they continue to have technology issues, but that dropped significantly. It was just over 50% last time. Now, another notable item here has to do with general productivity decline and some individuals having significant productivity decline. That's at 28%, so just over a quarter, of course, but that's a change from 17% in the prior period. So that's pretty. Those are some pretty significant issues and things that people can adjust on their individual level. On the view to revenue levels, if we look at companies' view as they look out to this quarter, the third quarter, or to the fourth quarter, those organizations, 54% of organizations felt their revenue levels would stay the same or increase. And that seems fairly rosy, but when you look at those organizations that think their revenue will reduce by greater than 10%, both of those periods, this quarter as well as the fourth quarter, that's 46% of organizations felt that it would reduce by at least 10%. So that's not rosy expectations for sure.
Were there any changes to the top concerns from the prior period?
A little bit. The top two spots stayed the same. That was the COVID health situation and then the COVID response and impact of the response stayed at number 2. Those were very closely related. So how it's impacting health and, are we being effective in responding to it? Elections moved into third place. It was also third on average. Then we moved down to civil unrest. Brexit is way at the last spot of those 8 choices. The other more standard question we've asked from most of the survey is the weekly top concerns. We had a forced ranking response. There were 7 items. The 2 top positions, tied for number 1, it was direct financial impact and staff safety protocols. So staff safety protocols is back on top or near one of the top slots. So that's, as we continue to figure out, are people returning to work? Are companies extending their work from home until 2021? It's just interesting to see the staff safety protocols was tied for number 1. So that makes the third position then access to adequate liquidity for those identifying it as their top concern.
That's interesting. How are the time estimates for health and financial normalcy looking?
So for the health outlook, Craig sort of alluded to this at the beginning, and that's the extension of time until COVID-19 becomes a minor health issue has increased up to the 11-month range from about 8.5 months in the prior period. And then the inflection point has really skyrocketed from 2 to 5 months, which is by far the largest jump we have seen in this survey. I don't think we've seen anything greater than like 3 or 4 months. So seeing 5 months on this is pretty high. And then for the financial normalcy in individual businesses, that came in at about 11 months, which was a 3-month increase from the last period.
Each period I typically ask you about AR and fiscal policy. Any changes on the negative outlooks here?
Yeah, so I think, again, last period, we were starting to see a slight glimmer of hope where AR was still negative, but was starting to become less negative. But then this last period, the AR period over period changes was still negative and it jumped back. So it was about 9 times negative. And then the fiscal policy is also reflecting negatively and is still sitting at about 3.5 times negative, which is about the same as what it was last period. So there wasn't any major shifts there either.
Craig, should we change the name back to the Global Crisis Monitor, or is there some glimmer of hope here?
Well, it's definitely not rosy results. I mean, reflecting what those numbers are is certainly more negative. But let me add one more negative thing to the list before I offer some encouraging data points. We asked again, what is your level of concern for your job now? So specific, does this look good, bad, or neutral? More concerned or extremely concerned made up close to 50%. So 47.5% of respondents were more concerned or extremely concerned about their jobs since the crisis started. And I believe that's the worst we've seen. We've asked that a couple times. That's not particularly, that's rather discouraging news. And we'll see how that changes over time. I mean, there's been a lot of negative news of late. We'll see how that plays out in the actual economic environment. But for some positive news, the 3 most encouraging data points that people pointed out was businesses reopening and declining COVID deaths and improving employment numbers. So there is a few areas where we can be happy and see some positive news coming out of the respondents to the monitor.
Before we wrap up the episode, what do we need to be thinking about for the weeks ahead?
I'll just say a couple things. Make sure your team has the right tools to be working effectively. Be more deliberate about how you keep people connected and engaged, and setting goals, making sure they're getting done to help the organizations you're in improve and beat these estimates. Second, we've asked a few more questions. One we added in addition to the inflection point for the virus to it becoming a minimal health point, and then economics. We also added another medical-related issue there to see where people think the death rates will change or shift, or what your view is on that, because that seemed to be a big concern. We also have a force ranking question or two about certain types of risks. But we also have some force ranking questions on risk and a couple other changes that seem appropriate now that we're at the beginning of August as we look at the next 4 weeks for the monitor. So stay tuned and please take the survey.
We wanted to encourage you to take the Global Crisis Monitor survey repeatedly while it's live. It runs from Wednesday to Tuesday every week. You can go to treasurycoalition.com and follow the links. Add your voice and insight so that as a profession, we can take positive and knowledgeable steps to move our organizations and nations forward. Invest 5 minutes each week at treasurycoalition.com and get great information and insights while helping our profession and organizations.
This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.